Hey, it's Keith Fiveson at the CWCB Expo here in New York City at the Jacob Javits Center. And I'm really excited to welcome to the Mindfulness Experience podcast an opportunity to speak with Ryan Hurley. Ryan is really going to be talking today about his trailblazing area in the field of cannabis law and beyond. He's the chairman of the Cannabis Practice Group at Roselaw Group, and is affectionately known as the father of cannabis law in Arizona. With over a decade of experience in the legal cannabis industry, Ryan has been at the forefront of cannabis reform, business compliance, and innovative legal practices. So I'm looking forward to speaking to Ryan. Ryan, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good, Keith. Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here, excited to be in New York for this amazing expo. And I think I got to update my bio because it's actually almost 15 years in the legal cannabis space now. Yeah, and in dog years, cannabis years, that's way too many for my math right now.
Well, I definitely want to give it to you because, it's a space that's really has evolved in so many ways. And I'd like to dive into some of the questions we've got. I know you've been a pivotal figure in Arizona cannabis law and what's really been happening there. Could you share with us some of the, issues in terms of your journey of legalizing cannabis in Arizona and some of the key challenges that you might have faced along the way?
Yeah, and there were so many. I mean, Arizona was kind of a leader as far as getting a medical marijuana law that had a regulated framework of dispensaries. We were really one of the first states to pass such a law in a pretty conservative, Republican-dominated state at the time. And despite the fact that the law passed, it was only 4,000 votes, but it passed. There was so much opposition from the beginning, and we spent 2 years where patients had the right to have medical marijuana, but there was no place to buy it. The governor stonewalled dispensaries, and so that was the first 2 years. I didn't really have any clients. I was just fighting to get the law implemented, and I did it because I believed in it. I found benefit from it myself, from migraines. And it was just reprehensible to me that we were putting people in jail for trying to feel better when they were sick. So that was a long and arduous battle, but we were able to get the dispensaries open. And then I had to face things like the Bar Association saying that I should be disbarred because it was still federally illegal and attorneys aren't allowed to help people break the law. So those are just two of the examples, but it's been a long, winding process and lots of fun and lots of challenges along the way.
I can only imagine. I was raised during the 70s when we had the Rockefeller laws here in New York State, and they were just absolutely terrible. And again, to your point, people are just wanting to feel better, and certainly cannabis has the capability with the endocannabinoid system to go ahead and help people feel like they're connected and feel like they're, certainly we've seen so many cases, whether or not it's Parkinson's or whether or not it's fibromyalgia, or it's, even cases in terms of looking at children who are dealing with epileptic fits and so on and so forth. So there's a real medicinal quality to it. Let me ask you, when you, as the chairman of the Cannabis Practice Group, you've had a unique vantage point on the evolution of the law. What do you see as the biggest legal hurdles facing cannabis businesses today, both in Arizona, but also nationwide?
Yeah, I mean, legal hurdle is still the federal government. Rescheduling appears to be coming, but it's a half measure. It's historic. It's a giant step. But primarily, the only real thing it will do is to eliminate the 280E tax burden for most dispensaries, which is historic in and of its own right. They can be treated from an IRS perspective as any other business, and will allow them to reinvest capital, bring new capital, new investors into the market. But at the end of the day, it's still illegal federally. Every day I go to work, and every day my clients open their doors, they're breaking the law, and everybody knows the fight is over. The federal government is the last to get there. So we just need to break through that final barrier and be done with it.
So I know that there's a process. The DEA said they were going to reschedule from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Do you think that's going to go through? Do you have a good feeling about that yourself?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. It's interesting. The DEA is being dragged along, kicking and screaming on this one. The Merrick Garland Department of Justice actually took it out of their hands and said, this is happening with or without your support. So it was a campaign promise by Biden. He's following the science. He's following the recommendation of the Department of Health and Human Services, who would know better than the DEA, quite frankly. So I am confident that it's going to happen. I think it's possible that, there could be some administrative delays that and some challenges, some legal challenges that might slow it down. And hopefully, something drastic doesn't happen in November and somebody comes in and tries to unwind it. But short of that, it's happening. It's just a matter of when, not if.
Now, I know, certainly let me just say, I really hope nothing does happen. And of course, we've seen, yesterday, we saw a big reversal from the FDA regarding the MDMA trials that should have been fast-tracked and legalized towards the end of the year. So I don't know if it's big pharma or who's coming in, but, there's always an alternative view. Certainly, we've seen something in the Wall Street Journal last week or the week before last, really trying to strike out against cannabis. And I'm just flummoxed by it. I just don't understand it. So let's see what happens with that. Let me ask you, in addition to your work with cannabis law, I also see that you're deeply involved in the area of digital assets. And I'm wondering, Web3, blockchain, how do you see these technologies intersecting in the cannabis industry, and what potential do you think they hold for the future?
Yeah, so it's funny. In the intervening 2 years, when I didn't have a lot of clients in the cannabis space, from when we legalized medical marijuana to when dispensaries were able to open, I got a little bored and started kind of going down the rabbit hole of some of these blockchain technologies and digital assets, and found that they really are and have the potential to sort of revolutionize the way that we do transactions. Not just cryptocurrency, but any transaction that would require an independent third party to verify and trust, an escrow company, a government, a bank. You can now do those transactions peer-to-peer without the interference of that third party. So it really will disintermediate and make these transactions more efficient. To date, other than on the illicit market, they haven't really interacted too much with the cannabis space. There have been some efforts to use them to track inventory, although I don't think that's necessary. This isn't nuclear waste that we're talking about. It's just cannabis. But I do think that it is bringing the entire world closer together and making, the central banks of the world slightly less necessary, and upending that power structure, I think, is good for the things that we know are right but are facing resistance from the government, like cannabis and psychedelics.
That's a very interesting perspective, especially given the sort of changes that I think we all feel in terms of looking at money and the central bank. And, that's basically the power infrastructure of the U.S. government. So if you're able to take away the, central bank or the need for a central bank and move towards digital assets, it has some potential far-reaching consequences, right?
Yeah, it does. And, I'm certainly not here to suggest that we need to upend everything. But if the central banks just merely adopt it as a protocol, it'll be better for everybody involved. I mean, you can transfer money to your cousin in Mexico without having to wait 10 days and, take $10 in fees out along the way. And it's our money. We shouldn't have to give it to somebody else just to send it.
Right. And I started thinking about today, we had this discussion about money, paper money, and less. I mean, I have some money in my pocket. I can't even figure out when I want to give it away. I'm using my phone. I'm using my Venmo. We're already pretty digital. So it's an interesting discussion. I think it's, we can only philosophize about it. There's no real answer to it. You can prognosticate into the future, but that's not necessarily valid. But we do feel the move of the the sidewalk is moving and we've got to walk with it or get stuck. I think that's very, very apparent. Let me ask you a question because of the law, on the regulatory landscape for cannabis. It's constantly changing. How do you stay ahead of the changes and the work that you do? And what advice would you give to businesses that are looking to navigate the complex environment?
Yeah, I think it's impossible to stay ahead of it because it really does change on a daily basis. I think the most important thing is being nimble and able to pivot quickly, and try to look a little bit ahead on decisions you're making and make sure that they can be adaptable to changing regulations. Right? Like, don't order $500,000 worth of packaging if you think the labeling regulations are in flux or haven't been interpreted yet. I mean, even if the regulation stays the same, the way that the regulating body interprets that or enforces it changes all the time from regulator to regulator. We could have one of my clients would have an inspection one day and they'd say one thing and they'd say something else to one of my other clients the next day. So you've got to be able to be nimble, make sure that your decisions are able to be adaptable, and hire good counsel so they can stay on top of it for you.
Hire good counsel. I like that. Because we all need counseling, right? I mean, especially in this space, because in a lot of cases we could just think everything's okay. But, we are at the CWCB Expo, and this is really the business of cannabis. It's really understanding the legal frameworks, the insurance frameworks, the supply chain requirements. All of that is absolutely necessary if you're going to be successful. So if you're coming into the space, your advice is be nimble, be quick, have good counsel, and really start to take a look at the legal framework, because the legal framework can change, and that's why you need a good lawyer. Yeah. Let me ask you, as we start looking at advances in the legal therapeutic area of psychedelics, because I'm a true believer, it's the mindfulness experience, I'm a true believer that these medicines really help individuals go ahead and be more present, deal with traumas, be more integrated in their health and wellness plan. Let me ask you, can you talk a little bit about the parallels that you see between the cannabis movement and the emerging psychedelic movement?
Yeah, I think about this a lot because there are a few parallels, but a lot more differences. And we see the parallels in that some of these therapeutic programs, particularly for psilocybin, are rolling out in the same states where legal cannabis did, right? Colorado, Oregon, pioneers in this front. Seeing some of it now on the East Coast. California is trying to work on it. Arizona, we had a bill at our legislature this year that I think has the votes, but for other reasons stalled. So you're seeing some of the same states move forward, but completely differently. You have this whole push to go through the pharmaceutical model, right? And we're seeing Lycos Therapeutics and others try to go down that traditional path. And we just didn't have that with cannabis. So if that happens and there isn't the state level initiatives aren't cemented yet, then it may look very, very different in the long run. Now we see today that the advisory panel to the FDA kind of did what everybody feared and suggested that despite the evidence to the contrary, that MDMA isn't ready for PTSD treatment. So if the feds keep dragging their feet, then we need to just keep pounding the sand at every state and making sure that it gets going similar to cannabis.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I was surprised to see the advisory board make that decision, especially when they said that the one line I loved was that it made the results were skewed because individuals could tell that they had or they didn't have MDMA. And of course, it's sort of like, okay, can you not tell if you've had a drink? I mean, what is, and of course, if we were trying to put alcohol through the FDA today based on the same standards, it would never go through because there is no medicinal quality to alcohol, but there certainly is a benefit. And the study showed that there was a benefit. So it's interesting. One of the things I'm interested in terms of what you said was about cannabis. We didn't go through that, but yet at the same point, we're at the point we are where the legalization question, it looks like certainly the DEA will be mandated to go ahead and legalize cannabis. Federally, we hope. We'll see.
It's not quite legal. It's still Schedule 3. So theoretically, it should be treated like Tylenol with codeine, but the FDA has not approved any cannabis medicine. So it's not legal federally yet. It's in a slightly better gray area.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So moving from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 means that it has medicinal qualities. So within that framework, my question is, let's back the truck up a little bit to go ahead and look at the medicinal qualities. Do you think that there's enough information out there to go ahead and talk about the medicinal qualities of cannabis and how it can really help in the number of areas that I started to talk about earlier?
Yeah, one of the big implications of rescheduling is that the people that want to study this, not just to try to prove that drugs are bad, but the people that want to study the efficacy from a medicinal standpoint will have access to cannabis to be able to do these trials that will get approved now. So we absolutely will see more of those trials happening and build to the mountain of evidence that we already know is there for the medical properties of this plant. The question then becomes, what does the FDA do with that information, right? The FDA is not really designed to approve a whole plant medicine. They're designed to approve a single synthetic molecule and a single repeatable delivery, and that's just not what cannabis is. So, frankly, it should be descheduled. The FDA should keep their hands off of it, and it should be treated more like a herbal product.
Because it is an herbal product. In fact, it grows out of the ground. How can we really regulate something that grows out of the ground? I don't get it. I really don't. I don't understand it. Let me ask you, as we start to wind down our time, you've shown an interest in all of these areas. Do you have any sort of general advice for people that are wanting to get into the space? You talked about have good counsel, so on and so forth. But I think if they were going ahead and putting together an outline or a map or a business plan or some sort of a strategy, what would you say to them and how would you refer to them? What kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah, so it really depends where you live, what state you want to start your business in. For example, in Arizona, if you actually wanted to be a cannabis licensee, a dispensary, or a grower, you would have to buy an existing license. We've given out all the licenses that there are, essentially. And that could be a $8 to $10 million investment. So in Arizona, if you don't have that kind of capital, you'd be looking at an ancillary type of business, right? Maybe you have a really great brand that you could license to an existing dispensary. Maybe you have designed really, really cool display cases that are, keeping the regulations in mind, but that highlight the cannabis better than a cheap jewel case. So I would say, you don't have to be a licensee to be able to be participating. I mean, you look around here, just in front of me, I see cases, security cameras, racks and lights. I mean, there are a million different ways to participate in this industry. The psychedelic industry is going to be a little trickier, and I think it might be a little too early to give general advice there. I think people are being successful with these therapeutic center models in Oregon. We'll see how they go in Colorado, but I'm not sure that's a sustainable business model. People paying $10,000 for a weekend to trip once, they're going to realize, I can get this on my own, and I'm not going to pay $10,000 to do this in Oregon. So I'm not sure how that's a sustainable business model. It's great progress, but we need to keep that in mind because otherwise it's going to fall apart.
Let me ask you, you brought up something for me as you started to talk about the area of, for me, the idea of consumption lounges and the area of building community and the area of building integrated health and wellness areas where we're really healing each other rather than going through the medical model. And from a mindfulness experience viewpoint, I really focus in on those areas: the mind, the body, the spirit, the food you take, the sleep you have, the relationships you have, the environment you live in, and what you're aspiring towards. I'm wondering your thoughts around these consumption lounges as we, I talked earlier with Eliza, Dr. Beast, who is creating The Other Side, a consumption lounge in New Jersey. And do you have any thoughts about that at all?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm glad that we're finally getting to the point where these are opening and people are putting some money into them to try to make them an experience where people go. There are consumption lounges in Arizona. They are not explicitly authorized by our law, but there's nothing saying that you can't do it. But a lot of cities don't know what to do with it from a zoning standpoint, so they're trying to shoehorn it into like a hookah lounge, which is not really the same thing. I also wish that we could go to a bar where if my friend didn't want to smoke a joint, they could get a beer and I could smoke a joint. I think that's one of the hard parts about consumption lounges is I think it limits the people that will go there to hang out, right? And I think that's kind of counterintuitive. Like, we want it to be a welcoming space for everybody, and so there should just be a space where you can choose to socialize in the way that you want to. Now, I think that's different than a wellness center, perhaps. I have found enormous healing benefit to yoga when I consume cannabis before I go into a yoga session. Turns my mind off, allows me to really focus and connect in my body. The same with sensory deprivation float tanks and cannabis. I've had amazing experiences in there. So I would like to see those sorts of healing centers where you could have different modalities to do that. Tough business model again, though.
I mean, Shiva is the ganja god. When you look at Hinduism and you look at the whole idea of Shiva, the ability to go ahead and consume cannabis. And I love the fact that you're able to do that and have a great yoga session. I mean, what a sweat, what a great opportunity. Yeah, I totally get that. Well, I think, the future is very interesting. How do people get a hold of you if they want more information, or they just want to pick your brain, if you will?
Ryan Hurley on LinkedIn, www.rose, like the flower, ROSE, lawgroup.com, roselawgroup.com, R Hurley at roselawgroup.com. Check me out, Ryan Hurley, Arizona attorney, and I'll pop up.
Great. Well, I really want to thank you, Ryan, so much for sharing your insights and being with me today here on the Mindfulness Experience. It's clear that your work significantly has impacted the cannabis industry and continues to shape its future. For our listeners who want to get a hold of Ryan and his work, or want to hear more about it, look for Ryan Hurley on LinkedIn and get a hold of him. His contact information will be in the show notes. And remember to stay mindful, stay informed, and keep exploring the intersections of health, technology, and law. Until next time, this is Keith Fiveson signing off from the Mindfulness Experience podcast here at the CWCB Expo. Thank you very much for listening.